The antique brass knocker felt cold under my fingers as I rapped it against the heavy oak door of Blackwood Manor. Through the misty evening air, the sound echoed, seemingly absorbed by the dense fog that had settled around the grand estate. Clutching my leather satchel, I waited, wondering if coming here had been a mistake after all. My name is Dr. Eleanor Price. As a historian specializing in architectural anomalies, I'd been drawn to Blackwood Manor like a moth to a flame. For decades, the estate had been closed to the public, but when its reclusive owner, Montgomery Blackwood, reached out requesting my expertise, how could I refuse? His letter had been cryptic, mentioning architectural inconsistencies that defied explanation and rooms that seemed to shift when no one was looking. The door creaked open, revealing a tall, gaunt man with silver hair. His piercing blue eyes seemed to look through me rather than at me. "Dr. Price, I presume," he said, his voice surprisingly warm, a contrast to his austere appearance. "I am Montgomery Blackwood. Please, come in." I stepped across the threshold and was immediately struck by the peculiar sensation that the house was somehow aware of my presence. A crystal chandelier illuminated the grand foyer, casting dancing shadows across marble floors and wood-paneled walls adorned with portraits of stern-faced Blackwoods from centuries past. "Thank you for coming on such short notice," Montgomery said, taking my coat. "Few academics take my concerns seriously these days. Your letter was intriguing, Mr. Blackwood. Architectural anomalies are precisely my area of study." He smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Then you are precisely who I need. Let me show you to your room, and then perhaps you'd like to see the ballroom. It's where most of our guests begin to notice things." As we ascended the grand staircase, I couldn't shake the feeling that the portraits were following our progress, their painted eyes shifting incrementally as we passed. Montgomery led me down a corridor to a beautifully appointed guest room on the second floor. "I've arranged for dinner at 7 o'clock in the small dining room," he said. "Afterward, I thought we might discuss the peculiarities of Blackwood Manor." After freshening up, I took the opportunity to explore the second floor. The manor was even larger than it appeared from outside, with corridors that seemed to extend impossibly far. Drawn toward the sound of soft music, a melancholy piano piece I couldn't quite identify, I followed the melody. It led me to a set of double doors, intricately carved with scenes of dancers frozen in mid-waltz. I pushed them open and gasped. Before me lay the most magnificent ballroom I had ever seen, bathed in the golden light of a dozen chandeliers. It was a vision from another era. The ceiling soared at least 30 feet high, painted with a fresco of the night sky, complete with twinkling stars that seemed almost to move. One wall was lined with floor-to-ceiling windows, though they showed only darkness outside despite the early evening hour. The parquet floor gleamed, its intricate pattern creating an optical illusion of depth. "Remarkable, isn't it?" Montgomery's voice startled me. I hadn't heard him approach. "It's extraordinary," I admitted. "The proportions shouldn't be possible given the exterior dimensions of the house." "Yes," he said softly. "The first of many impossibilities you'll encounter here. This ballroom has witnessed countless celebrations over the centuries. Every guest who has ever stayed at Blackwood Manor has seen this room." His voice dropped to a near whisper. "But no one who has ventured to the third floor has ever returned to tell what they found there." A chill ran down my spine. "The third floor. We should go to dinner," he said abruptly, offering his arm. "My sister will be joining us. She rarely meets guests, but she was quite insistent on meeting you." Dinner was a strange affair. Montgomery's sister, Agatha Blackwood, was a small woman with the same piercing blue eyes as her brother, though hers had a milky quality, as though partially blinded. She asked pointed questions about my research, my interest in architectural anomalies, and whether I believed in what she called the thinness of reality. "The manor was built in 1784, Montgomery explained as we dined on roast pheasant. "Our ancestor, Thaddeus Blackwood, was an architect with unconventional ideas about space and dimension. He collaborated with a mathematician," Agatha added, watching me intently. A man who was eventually committed to an asylum for his radical theories about folded space. Folded space? I asked, my academic curiosity piqued. The notion that physical space can be manipulated like paper, creating pockets where the rules of geometry no longer apply, Montgomery said. Thaddeus believed he could build these principles into the very structure of the house. That's fascinating, but surely impossible, I replied. Agatha's thin lips curved into a smile. And yet, the ballroom exists with dimensions that cannot be reconciled with the exterior of the house. How do you explain that, Dr. Price? After dinner, Montgomery invited me to his study, a cozy room lined with books and dominated by a large desk covered in architectural drawings. These are the original plans for Blackwood Manor, he said, unrolling a yellowed parchment drawn by Thaddeus himself. I leaned over the plans, immediately spotting inconsistencies. Corridors that should lead to dead ends instead looped back on themselves. Rooms overlapped in impossible ways. And the third floor. I frowned, tracing the strange geometry with my finger. The third floor doesn't make sense, I murmured. These rooms couldn't possibly connect this way. No, they couldn't, Montgomery agreed. Not if one adheres to conventional geometry. But Thaddeus wasn't conventional. What exactly is happening on the third floor, Mr. Blackwood? He sighed heavily. People disappear, Dr. Price. 17 guests over the past century. They venture upstairs, curious about rumors they've heard, and they simply never come down again. That's a matter for the police, not a historian, I said carefully, wondering if I'd walked into some elaborate trap. The police have investigated multiple times. They find nothing. No evidence of foul play, no hidden passages, no bodies. He rubbed his temples. The last detective who came searched the entire third floor and declared it empty. He left, wrote his report, and then shot himself 3 days later. The note he left simply said, "The rooms keep changing." That night, sleep eluded me. Though comfortable, my room felt strangely fluid, as though the walls breathed subtly in and out. The house creaked and settled, sounds magnified in the quiet darkness. Around 3 o'clock in the morning, I heard what sounded like distant dancing music and a soft murmur of voices from somewhere above. The third floor. I told myself I was imagining things, but the historian in me couldn't resist the mystery. Slipping on my robe and taking my flashlight, I stepped quietly into the corridor. The music grew slightly louder as I found the staircase leading upward. A velvet rope blocked the way with a small sign reading, "No admittance." I hesitated only briefly before stepping over it. The stairs seemed to go on longer than they should, twisting in a way that left me disoriented. When I finally reached the third floor landing, the music had stopped, leaving only an oppressive silence. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing a corridor that stretched in both directions, lined with doors. I tried the nearest door. Locked. As were the next 3 I tried. The fourth door, however, swung open at my touch, revealing what appeared to be a child's nursery, though thick dust covered everything, suggesting it hadn't been used in decades. A rocking chair by the window moved slightly, as though someone had just vacated it. "Hello." I called, my voice sounding flat and muffled, as if the air itself was absorbing the sound. I backed out of the room, unsettled, and continued down the hall. The next open door led to a laboratory of sorts with ancient equipment and jars of unidentifiable specimens. Notebooks filled with equations and diagrams covered a large desk. I picked one up, squinting at the faded handwriting. The convergence of non-Euclidean geometry with physical space creates pockets of dimensional instability, I read aloud. Within these pockets, perception and reality become malleable. A sound behind me, like a footstep, made me whirl around. The doorway through which I had entered was gone, replaced by a solid wall. My heart pounding, I turned in a complete circle. The room now had a different door on the opposite wall. Had I become disoriented? I was certain the door had been behind me. I approached the new door cautiously and opened it. Instead of the hallway, I found myself looking into the ballroom I'd seen earlier, but changed. The chandeliers were lit with candles rather than electric lights, and dozens of people in 19th-century attire waltzed across the floor, though no music played. None of them seemed to notice me watching from a doorway that shouldn't have existed on the ballroom's second-floor gallery. I blinked, and the scene changed. The dancers were gone. The ballroom stood empty and decayed, dust covers on the furniture, windows boarded up. Another blink, and it transformed again, now modern, mid-renovation, with scaffolding and construction materials. I stepped back, closing the door with trembling hands. When I turned around, the laboratory had changed, too. Equipment had moved, notebooks were arranged differently, and a half-drunk cup of tea steamed on the desk where nothing had been before. "Spatial inconsistency is merely the first symptom," said a voice from the shadows. An elderly man in antiquated clothing emerged, his eyes the same piercing blue as Montgomery and Agatha's. "Temporal inconsistency follows." "Who are you?" I asked, though I suspected I knew. "Thaddeus Blackwood, at your service," he gave a small bow. "And you've wandered into my greatest achievement and my most terrible mistake. You can't be Thaddeus. He would be over 250 years old." He smiled sadly. "Time moves differently here, especially on the third floor." "What year do you believe it to be, madam?" I told him, and he looked shocked. "Then it has been even longer than I thought. I have been trapped here for what feels like decades, shifting between times and variations of my home." "This is impossible," I whispered. "No more impossible than a ballroom larger on the inside than the house that contains it," he countered. "I found a way to fold space, you see, to create rooms that exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. But I didn't account for the temporal implications. The more I manipulated space, the more time began to leak. The missing guests. Not missing. Just lost in time. Some went forward, some backward. Others, I fear, slipped sideways into versions of the manor that never quite existed in your reality." He gestured around us. "We are all here, trapped in the folds. Sometimes we glimpse each other, passing like ships in the night across decades or centuries. How do I get back?" I asked, fighting rising panic. Thaddeus approached a bookshelf and removed a leather-bound journal. "My calculations. I've been trying to reverse the effect for however long I've been here. If you can understand them, perhaps you can find your way back. And maybe, help the rest of us." I took the journal with shaking hands. "Montgomery and Agatha, they know about this, don't they? They sent me up here deliberately." "My descendants have their own agenda," Thaddeus said cryptically. "They believe there is power in the anomaly. Power they can harness. They send people they believe are sensitive to the folds, hoping to learn more." Before I could question him further, the room darkened momentarily, as though a cloud had passed over an unseen sun. When the light stabilized, Thaddeus was gone. I spent what felt like hours examining the journal, trying to decipher Thaddeus's elaborate mathematical notations. The equations described space in ways I'd never considered, treating physical dimensions as variables that could be manipulated under certain conditions. The manor, it seemed, had been built on a focal point where such manipulation was naturally easier, what Thaddeus called a thin place. As I studied, I became aware that the room around me was subtly changing. Books appeared and disappeared on shelves. The color of the curtains shifted from green to blue to faded red. Outside the windows, I glimpsed different seasons, different eras, gaslit streets, horse-drawn carriages, then automobiles, then nothing but overgrown wilderness. I needed to find my way back. And soon. According to Thaddeus's notes, the ballroom was the key, a deliberate anomaly designed as an anchor point, a stable reference in the shifting geometry of the house. If I could reach it, I might find my way back to my own time and space. I approached the door through which I had previously seen the ballroom. Taking a deep breath, I opened it and found only a linen closet. I tried another door and another, increasingly desperate as each revealed ordinary rooms, none leading where I needed to go. Then I heard it. Faint piano music, the same melancholy tune I'd followed earlier. I followed the sound down a corridor that seemed to lengthen with each step, the walls occasionally rippling like disturbed water. Finally, I reached a familiar set of double doors carved with dancing figures. The ballroom beyond was empty but intact, moonlight streaming through the windows. As I stepped inside, I felt a strange sensation, as though the air had become thicker, more resistant. The door swung shut behind me with a decisive click. "You've made it further than most." Agatha Blackwood stood in the center of the room, though I was certain it had been empty moments before. She looked different, younger, her eyes clear and sharp. "What is this place, really?" I demanded. "And what do you want from me?" "This house exists in multiple states simultaneously," she said, beginning to circle me slowly. "Past, present, future, and paths not taken, all overlapping. Most people can only perceive one state at a time, but some, like you, can sense the transitions. You feel them, don't you? The shifts." I nodded reluctantly. "That's why you and Montgomery believe there's power in the anomaly." She laughed, a brittle sound. "He always is so dramatic. There is power here, but not the kind my brother thinks. He believes we can control the shifts, use them to see the future or change the past. He's wrong." She stopped directly in front of me. "The power is in surviving them, in learning to navigate between states of reality. You've been to the third floor, I realized. You've returned many times. I've learned its patterns, its rhythms. The house speaks to me now." She reached out, taking my hand. Her touch was ice cold. "It could speak to you, too, Eleanor. You have the sensitivity." I pulled away. "I just want to go back to the second floor, finish my research, and leave." "You don't understand. No one truly leaves Blackwood Manor. Even those who walk out the front door carry a piece of it with them. A fold in their perception that never quite smooths out." The piano music began again, though there was no pianist to be seen. "That's our cue," Agatha said, suddenly urgent. "The shift is coming. Choose now, Eleanor. Stay with me. Learn to navigate the folds, or try to run back to a world that will never again make sense to you." The air in the ballroom began to waver like heat rising from summer pavement. The floor beneath my feet felt less solid, as though I might sink through it at any moment. Agatha extended her hand again, her expression almost pleading. In that moment of decision, the ballroom doors burst open. Montgomery stood there, wild-eyed and disheveled. "Eleanor, don't listen to her," he gasped. "Agatha isn't what she seems." Agatha's face contorted with anger. "You fool. You'll disrupt the pattern." The room began to shake, chandeliers swinging violently, the fresco ceiling rippling like disturbed water. "The house is collapsing," Montgomery shouted over the growing rumble. "Too many contradictions in one place. We need to get to stable ground." He grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the doors. Agatha lunged for us, her form seeming to elongate unnaturally, fingers stretching into claw-like appendages. "She's been trapped between states for years," Montgomery explained as we ran down the corridor. "Not fully in any one reality. It's driven her mad." We reached the staircase, the manor groaning around us like a ship in a storm. Paintings fell from walls. Furniture slid across tilting floors. And behind us, a terrible ripping sound suggested the very fabric of the house was tearing. "Why did you bring me here?" I shouted as we descended. "To help me fix it," he called back. "The anomalies are getting worse. Thaddeus's equations predicted this. Eventually, the folds would become unstable. I needed someone who could understand his work, help reverse it before the house tears itself apart and takes half the countryside with it." We reached the second floor, which seemed relatively stable compared to the chaos above. Montgomery pulled me into his study, slamming and locking the door behind us. He rushed to his desk, retrieving the original plans I'd examined earlier, along with a stack of modern equipment, laptops, measuring devices, and what appeared to be custom-built sensors. "I've been monitoring the anomalies for years," he explained, bringing up complex graphical displays on a laptop. "They're expanding beyond the house now. Last month, a farmer's field half a mile away suddenly aged 50 years overnight. Before that, a section of the nearby forest reverted to saplings. You should have been honest with me from the start," I said, though I couldn't deny my fascination with what he was showing me. "Would you have believed me? Or would you have dismissed me as a madman as every other expert has?" His eyes pleaded for understanding. "My family has been trying to contain this for generations. We're the only ones who can perceive the shifts naturally. Something in our bloodline connects us to what Thaddeus did." A violent tremor shook the room, books tumbling from shelves. "We're running out of time," Montgomery said grimly. "The third floor is becoming untethered. If it fully detaches from conventional space-time, what happens then? I don't know. But the mathematical model suggests a cascading effect. The instability would spread, growing exponentially." I thought of Thaddeus's journal, still clutched in my hand. I may have something that can help. For the next few hours, as the house shuddered and groaned around us, we worked feverishly, combining Thaddeus's theoretical approach with Montgomery's empirical data. The old architect had been brilliant but had made a fundamental error in his calculations, one that had compounded over centuries. The house isn't just folded space, I realized, staring at the combined equations. It's a knot in reality. That has created a self-reinforcing loop, with each anomaly strengthening the others. So how do we unravel it without causing everything to collapse? "We don't," I said, the solution becoming clear. "We can't undo what's been done without destroying the house entirely. But we can stabilize it. Find the keystone of the structure and reinforce it." "The ballroom," Montgomery whispered. "It's always been the center." Another violent tremor hit, and plaster rained down from the ceiling. A crack raced across the wall of the study. "We need to get to the ballroom now," I said, gathering the essential papers. "Before the connection to the third floor completely destabilizes." The journey back to the ballroom was harrowing. Corridors stretched and contracted as we moved through them. Doors led to unexpected places. A conservatory suddenly opened onto a cliff edge overlooking a stormy sea. A bathroom revealed a sunlit garden from a century ago. When we finally reached the carved double doors of the ballroom, they were warping in their frames, wood rippling like liquid. We forced them open together and stumbled into chaos. The ballroom was filled with fragments of different times. In one corner, a 19th century ball was in progress. In another, the room stood abandoned and decaying. The ceiling showed night and day simultaneously, and the floor rippled with temporal waves. And in the center stood Agatha, or something wearing Agatha's form. She seemed to flicker between different versions of herself, young, old, alive, dead, and something else entirely, a shape I couldn't quite comprehend. "You're too late," her voice echoed strangely, as though coming from multiple sources at once. "The unraveling has begun." "Agatha, please," Montgomery pleaded. "Help us stabilize the house. You know what will happen if it collapses completely." She laughed, the sound fracturing into multiple overlapping echoes. "Why would I want stability? In chaos, I am everywhere and everyone. I have transcended the limitations of a single reality." I studied her carefully, noticing how the distortions in the room seemed to center on her position. "She's the keystone now," I murmured to Montgomery. "Somehow, she's become the focal point of the anomaly." "How is that possible?" "Your sister has spent more time navigating the folds than anyone," I theorized. Decades of exposure must have fundamentally changed her, integrated her into the structure of the anomaly itself. The realization hit Montgomery like a physical blow. So to stabilize the house. We need to stabilize Agatha, I confirmed. Or remove her influence entirely. Agatha's form rippled, growing larger, more distorted. I can hear you, you know. I hear everything in every version of this house across all possible timelines. She gestured, and the floor beneath Montgomery liquefied. He sank to his knees, then his waist, being pulled down into whatever lay beneath the ballroom. Agatha, stop. I shouted. You're not just destroying the house. You're destroying yourself. The anomaly is breaking down, becoming chaotic, without structure, without pattern. You won't transcend reality. You'll be torn apart by it. Her multiple faces turned toward me, expressions ranging from fury to fear. You're lying. Look around you. I gestured at the increasingly fragmented room. This isn't controlled folding anymore. It's shattering. Thaddeus made a mistake in his equations, and it's been compounding for centuries. The folds are collapsing. For a moment, Agatha seemed to solidify into a single form, an elderly woman with clear, calculating eyes. Show me, she demanded. I held up Thaddeus's journal, open to the critical page where I'd identified the error. Here. He assumed the spatial folds would remain static, but they're dynamic, constantly shifting in response to observation and interaction. The more people who experienced the anomalies, the more unstable they became. Montgomery had managed to pull himself partially out of the liquefied floor, which was beginning to solidify again as Agatha's attention focused on the equations. So it's been my fault all along, she murmured. Every time I navigated the folds, I weakened them further. Not just you, I said gently. Every guest who ever came here. Every Blackwood who lived within these walls. The house was designed to be experienced by people, but each experience stretched the folds a little more. Agatha closed her eyes, and for a moment, the chaos in the ballroom subsided slightly. I can feel it now. The thinning. The tearing. You're right. She looked at her brother with sudden clarity. Montgomery, I'm sorry. I thought I was becoming something greater, but I was just coming undone. Help us fix it, he said, finally freeing himself from the floor. You understand the house better than anyone. If we combine our knowledge, yours, mine, Eleanor's, and Thaddeus's, we might be able to stabilize the folds without collapsing them entirely. The next few hours were a blur of frantic work. Using Thaddeus's journal, Montgomery's data, and Agatha's intuitive understanding of the house's patterns, we developed a theory. The anomalies could be contained if we created a deliberate, controlled fold, a safety valve of sorts that would allow the excess dimensional energy to dissipate harmlessly. The third floor, Agatha suggested. We seal it off completely. Let it exist in its own pocket of reality, separate from the rest of the house and the normal world. A permanent fold, I mused. It could work. But how do we create it? What would be the anchor? Something, or someone, that exists in multiple states simultaneously to hold the pattern in place, she said, looking down at her hands. Montgomery paled. Agatha, no. She smiled sadly. Brother, I've been neither fully here nor fully gone for decades. This is my purpose, the reason I've been able to navigate the folds when others became lost. I'm meant to be the anchor. There must be another way, he protested. There isn't, she said with quiet certainty. And you know it. As the house continued to deteriorate around us, we worked to prepare the ritual Agatha insisted would create the permanent fold. It required elements from Thaddeus's original work, specific geometric arrangements, materials from the house's foundation, and finally, Agatha herself at the center of it all. We set up in the third-floor corridor at the junction where the most severe anomalies were occurring. Agatha drew complex patterns on the walls and floor, incorporating Thaddeus's corrected equations. Montgomery reluctantly gathered objects from throughout the timeline of the house, a brick from the original foundation, a sliver of wood from a tree that hadn't yet been planted, dust from a future when the house would stand abandoned. As dawn approached, felt rather than seen in the windowless corridor, Agatha positioned herself at the center of the pattern. "Once I begin, you must both leave immediately," she instructed. "Return to the second floor or below. Do not look back, no matter what you hear." Montgomery embraced his sister one last time. "Will I ever see you again?" "Perhaps," she said softly. "The folds will still exist, just contained. Sometimes you might catch a glimpse of me in a mirror or hear my voice on the wind. But I will be elsewhere." He nodded, tears in his eyes, and stepped back to join me at the top of the stairs. Agatha began to recite Thaddeus's equations, her voice taking on a strange resonance that seemed to vibrate through the very structure of the house. The patterns around her began to glow with an unearthly light, and the air thickened with potential. "Now," she called. "Go." We turned and hurried down the stairs, the sound of Agatha's recitation growing distorted behind us. As we reached the second-floor landing, a tremendous force shook the entire house. I stumbled, nearly falling as Montgomery caught my arm. Above us, a brilliant light flashed from the third-floor stairwell, followed by absolute silence. The tremor subsided. The house settled. After a moment of hesitation, Montgomery started back up the stairs. "Wait," I said, grabbing his sleeve. She said not to look back. "I have to know if it worked," he insisted, gently removing my hand. I followed him up to the landing, where we both stopped short. Where the third-floor corridor had been, there was now only a solid wall with no indication a staircase had ever continued upward. Montgomery pressed his palm flat against the wall, closing his eyes. "She's there," he whispered. "I can feel her. Not gone. Just folded away." We made our way back downstairs in silence, both processing what had happened. The house felt different now. Still unusual, still containing its ballroom that defied conventional geometry, but stable. The rippling walls, the temporal shifts, the sense of impending collapse, all gone. As we descended the grand staircase, I noticed something peculiar. The portraits that had seemed to watch us before now appeared as ordinary paintings, their eyes fixed and unmoving. The corridors no longer stretched impossibly far but maintained reasonable proportions. Yet the air still held a subtle charge, like the lingering electricity after a thunderstorm. "The house is healing itself," Montgomery said, noticing my observations. "Returning to a state of equilibrium, though it will never be entirely normal. Too much has happened within these walls." We reached the foyer, where golden morning light streamed through stained glass windows, casting jewel-toned patterns across the marble floor. Outside, birds sang, and the world seemed refreshingly ordinary, a stark contrast to the chaos we'd just experienced. I ran my fingers along a wooden panel, feeling the solid reality of it. "Will it stay this way? Stable?" Montgomery nodded cautiously. "I believe so. As long as no one attempts to recreate Thaddeus's experiments or disturb what we've sealed away." He gestured to a small portrait I hadn't noticed before, a painting of Agatha as a young woman, her blue eyes sharp and knowing. "She'll ensure it from her side of the fold." "What happens now?" I asked as we stood in the suddenly peaceful house. Montgomery looked around as if seeing his ancestral home with new eyes. "Now, Dr. Price, we document everything. Thaddeus's work, Agatha's sacrifice, your crucial insights, all of it. Future generations of Blackwoods will need to understand what happened here and why the third floor must never be disturbed." He smiled faintly. "And the ballroom?" "The ballroom remains our beautiful impossibility, a reminder of what lies just beyond our conventional understanding of reality." I stayed at Blackwood Manor for another week, helping Montgomery catalog Thaddeus's papers and creating a comprehensive record of the events that had transpired. We carefully documented the mathematical principles behind the spatial anomalies, the corrected equations, and explicit warnings about the dangers of attempting to manipulate the folds further. On my last day, Montgomery walked me to my car, the morning fog lifting to reveal the grand facade of Blackwood Manor gleaming in the sunlight. "Will you tell anyone what really happened here?" he asked. I considered the question carefully. I'll publish a paper on the unusual architectural properties of the ballroom, the measurable, verifiable aspects. As for the rest, I smiled. Some truths are better preserved within these walls. He nodded, satisfied. You're welcome to return. You know, there's still much to study, even with the third floor sealed away. I might take you up on that, I said, though part of me wondered if I could ever fully readjust to the mundane world after experiencing the fluid reality of Blackwood Manor. He hesitated, then reached into his pocket and withdrew a small, ornate key. This was Agatha's. It opens a cabinet in the library containing some of Thaddeus's lesser-known journals. If you do return, perhaps you'd like to examine them. She would have wanted you to. I accepted the key, feeling its weight, both physical and metaphorical, in my palm. Thank you. I'll consider it carefully. As we walked to my car through the morning mist, I found myself looking at the surrounding landscape with new eyes. The ancient oaks that lined the driveway seemed to exist in multiple states at once, their present form overlaid with ghostly images of their past and future selves. Had the house changed my perception permanently, or was my mind simply struggling to readjust to normal reality? You'll see things differently now, Montgomery said quietly, as if reading my thoughts. The experience never fully leaves you. The Blackwoods have lived with it for generations. Is that why your family rarely leaves the estate? I asked. Partly. The outside world can be disorienting once you've glimpsed what lies beneath its surface. And there's always the fear that we might unintentionally carry the anomalies with us. I thought of the farmer's field that had aged 50 years overnight, the forest that had reverted to saplings. Has that happened before? Once, he admitted. My grandfather traveled to London in 1922. The hotel where he stayed experienced a series of inexplicable events, clocks running backward, rooms that couldn't be found twice in the same day. He returned immediately and never left Blackwood Manor again. We reached my car, parked where the gravel drive met the main road. The morning sun had burned away most of the fog, revealing the full grandeur of Blackwood Manor against the backdrop of rolling hills. From the outside, it looked perfectly normal, a beautiful, if imposing, example of 18th century architecture. Will you be all right here alone? I asked. Montgomery's smile was tinged with melancholy. I'm never truly alone here. And now, perhaps, less so. He glanced toward the upper floors of the house. Besides, I have decades of research to organize and a legacy to preserve. As I drove away, I glanced in my rearview mirror for one last look at the house. For just a moment, I thought I saw a figure in an upper window where no window should exist, a woman with piercing blue eyes raising her hand in farewell. Then I blinked, and there was only the solid stone wall of the manor's exterior, with no hint of the impossibilities it contained. My name is Dr. Eleanor Price, and I'm a historian specializing in architectural anomalies. If you ever receive an invitation to Blackwood Manor, know this: every guest will see the magnificent ballroom with its impossible dimensions and painted stars. But no one ever returns from the third floor because the third floor no longer exists in our reality. It's there, just folded away, with Agatha Blackwood keeping watch for all eternity over the thin places where our world brushes against others. Sometimes, on quiet nights when I'm half asleep, I still hear that melancholy piano music drifting through my dreams. And I wonder if somewhere, in a fold of reality just beyond our perception, Agatha is still dancing through the endless variations of her family home, no longer lost, but finally free. And if you ever find yourself in a house where the proportions don't quite add up, where corridors seem longer from the inside than they should be, where rooms appear to shift when you're not looking, remember the Blackwoods. Remember that some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved, some doors meant to stay closed. After all, not everyone who ventures into the folds is fortunate enough to find their way back.